Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Indiana Sports Talk Show. We have a very special guest joining us today. Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star joins us here. Zach, we are almost to football, man. It's about time. We're getting there. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's just kind of preparing myself. The days are suddenly a lot busier. It seems like it happens overnight anymore. So uh, that's how it goes these days.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Zach, there's so much to talk about with Indiana football, which obviously hasn't always been the case for them. But, man, before we hop into looking to 2026, I'm curious for you. Talk to me about Curt Cignetti and really what we've seen the last couple of years, him coming in and kind of the night and day difference in a lot of ways for Indiana football over the last 2 years. And obviously the championship run, all that stuff. Man, talk to me about what in your mind did he bring to, kind of make this change happen? Because it's kind of crazy how Indiana football really got put on the map the last 2 years. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, listen, what I tell people about Curt Cignetti is what you see is just kind of what he is, at least in my experience. The confidence, obviously some of the quirks, how much he loves to watch film and things like that. I think there's always kind of been this impression that he does maintain a bit of a distance and a bit of discipline with his players. A colleague and I wrote a book about last season and everything building up to last season. Shameless plug for Unthinkable to Unstoppable. I'm just kind of doing that by instinct now. Forgive me. But we talked to some of the guys that came with him from James Madison, and they said, I might have had two conversations with him in my entire life before I transferred to IU. He is he is very much kind of a creature of habit and of his process. But the more you talk to people about it, the more you realize how intentional it is. For example, and this has kind of been well worn at the back end, that a lot of those things he said in his first year in Bloomington were very much sort of designed to speak to his fan base, to try and coach his fan base, to try and sort of sort of instill some confidence, some belief, some swagger into a fan base that he recognized, pretty much immediately really didn't have much of any of that. But it was interesting again for the book to talk about, to talk to those JMU guys who's almost to a man said they started hearing those things he was saying, from day one and thinking, who is this guy? He was never like this at James Madison. He had confidence. He wasn't afraid to be a little bit brash and very sort of ambitious. But, saying stuff publicly like that, making these sort of what at the time seemed almost like sort of wild statements, like Purdue sucks or Google me, things like that. They were like, where is this coming from? This is not necessarily the Curt Cignetti we know. But even with the benefit of hindsight, you're able to see that was just him adjusting his process to what he recognized was required in that moment, and he stopped doing it last year. And that tells you that he felt like he didn't need to do it anymore. So, like I said, it's, what you see with Curt Cignetti is what you get. There is an intentionality behind, I think, just about everything that he does. And that from Indiana's perspective, that was by design. They didn't want a young coach when they went into the coaching search. They wanted a coach who had been around, who'd run his own program, who had some of that experience and, could really, be comfortable in his own shoes from day one with what Indiana was going to need him to do. And obviously, it worked out kind of in a best possible case scenario.
Yeah, and walk me through, man, just because obviously you've been covering, Indiana for a bit now. Walk me through just the entire college football playoff and just your experience covering the team, and obviously the end there with the heroics of Fernando Mendoza and just all that stuff that you got the privilege of covering last year. What was that like for you?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, I'd covered one national championship ever. That was in men's soccer, but before this season, that was, and obviously, listen, I'm not demeaning that at all, but it's a different experience, right? It's a different
Right.
sort of, it's a different kind of, the stakes are different, the stage is different, et cetera. And I think what was fun about last season was just from a professional perspective, obviously you maintain an objective sort of approach to it all, but every step of the way, you could kind of almost just watch it unfold in exactly the way it kind of needed to, to beat Illinois the way they did, to beat Iowa the way they did, to beat Oregon the way they did. I think it again, and I have this added perspective because we re-reported so much of this for the book, but so many of the players that we talked to said, yeah, it kind of had to be Ohio State in the Big Ten. It needed to be number one Ohio State. It couldn't be one of those. I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss the old Big Ten West, but listen, they kind of dismissed themselves. It couldn't be one of those Big Ten West teams that, went 8-4 and 9-3 and got into the title game. It was always second best. It needed to be Ohio State. It needed to be Alabama. That so much of last season became both remarkable on the field and I think symbolic around it in a lot of ways. And I think that's what made Indiana a distinctive national champion. Within even just sort of the modern era. And I've said this many times now, Indiana will be remembered distinctly forever. And it's not because Indiana could beat 2019 LSU in some hypothetical matchup or, 2006 Florida or whatever. It's because Indiana did something no one thought was possible. And you only really get to do that once. If Northwestern wins the national title this season, that will be great. Fantastic. I think it'll be good for the sport. I think it'll continue to deepen the sense of parity. I'm just using Northwestern as an example. But no one will see Northwestern quite the same way. The comparison I've used is, when Roger Bannister, and I've worn this out now, but when Roger Bannister ran the first 4-minute mile, before he did that, everyone believed it was an anatomical impossibility. The human body literally could not run that far, that fast, in that short a space of time. And then like 6 weeks later, somebody ran it slightly faster, but nobody remembers who that person is because the point wasn't who could run the fastest. The point was proving something thought to be impossible wasn't. And that's what Indiana did. And I think that's why it was such a fun and interesting story to tell. And why I think it captured sort of the attention and the imagination of so many people.
Absolutely. Well, obviously last year was amazing, but now moving forward to 2026, there was quite a few losses that Indiana had to the draft and obviously some players graduating, things like that. So some of those key losses, obviously Fernando Mendoza, Omar Cooper, D'Angelo Pons, Elijah Sarrett, Lewis Moore, just to name a few, there's plenty more. All those guys, obviously key contributors last year for this Indiana team, and obviously got some transfers in this year, so for you, and as you look at how Indiana plans to start to replace some of those key roles they had last year, what do you think is their plan for some of those guys that were the best of the best there on that team last year that you think will potentially slide in or compete for the starting positions there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is really kind of proven out in what Curt Cignetti has sort of proven just across the course of his career, which is one of his greatest strengths, particularly in the modern sort of iteration of college athletics, is fitting his system. And this is true, he's more involved with it offensively, he'll tell you that, than he is defensively, but fitting what he's trying to do, just across the board to his personnel and understanding where the right points of intersections are between, these are our principles, these are our non-negotiables, these are the things that whether it's, X's and O's or it's something more cultural, we're just not going to compromise on. And then these are the things that, these are the areas where we can kind of make the system rise to meet the player. And no, it's not just quarterback, but no position sort of represents that better than quarterback. Cignetti's last 4 starting quarterbacks have all been transfers. 3 of the 4 won Conference Player of the Year. All 4 were all conference. And obviously one of them won a Heisman Trophy and a national title. But it goes back even to his time at James Madison. And, I use the example of Jordan McLeod, who was Sun Belt Player of the Year at James Madison. And when Indiana, when the staff came over from James Madison to Indiana, we all assumed they might just pursue McLeod. Cignetti looked at McLeod, number one, I think at the time there was some question over whether he would get one more year of college eligibility. And number two, I think there was a feeling that maybe Indiana would need something different. And Cignetti never even really kind of considered Jordan McLeod. It was always kind of on to Curtis Rourke. And that gets to that ability to spot talent and sort of character and understand why it will fit what you're trying to do, and then understanding how to fit what you're trying to do around it. Because it's the old sort of, the old coaching maxim of you have to put players in positions to succeed. Otherwise you're failing them as much as they're failing you. Mm. And then listen, the other piece of this is Indiana did lose a lot, but Indiana still retains quite a bit too. They're going to have basically 3.5 starting linemen back because Demola Ajani was a starter by last year, and they've got to shuffle some pieces around. Bray Lynch should probably slide over to center, maybe Drew Evans, but my guess is Bray Lynch. It sounds like they're going to move Joe Bruner, the Wisconsin guard transfer, out to right tackle. But they've got Charlie Becker back at receiver. Tyler Morris is healthy again. Kobe Martin was a sort of a meaningful contributor as a third string running back. He'll be in the mix at running back this year. They've got both their defensive tackles back. They've got 2 starting linebackers back. I think 2 starting defensive backs, the Big Ten kicker of the year. We can kind of go on, but the point is, for all that they lost, the cupboard's not bare because they have done an excellent job. And this was last year, and that's what set up the national title run. And it's again this year why I think there's probably not going to be a ton of drop off, if any, is Indiana's done a great job of retaining and then developing. And so I think there is just an extent to which, from Indiana's perspective, for all that they lost, undeniably, the system and the process, as best as one can in sort of the transfer portal era, are going to keep guys in the program and then keep guys progressing with the program. And that's not to say there aren't questions. You're going to have a new starting quarterback. You're going to be very young at tight end. Like I just said a minute ago, you're moving some pieces around on the offensive line. You got some production to replace on the defensive line. But, it's not like Indiana drained the whole roster last season and is starting over completely. There are a lot of good building blocks still there.
Yeah, for sure. And as you kind of look at it, though, like mentioned a couple new positions that will have new starters this year. And obviously there's always questions going into every year. For you, as you look at this, Zach, what are some of the biggest burning questions in your mind for this Indiana team this year? Obviously coming off like you said, an improbable run in a lot of ways, but now coming in this year, expectations are going to be sky high. So what do you think are some of the biggest burning questions that you have as you look at this team and say, how are they going to look in 2026 coming off, obviously, the high of winning the national championship?
Well, number one, anytime you're moving things around on the offensive line, that is a question mark. Ajani looked good last year, but he's still young. Bruner's never played right tackle and tackle at all in college. You are having to fit some new skill players in. Obviously, you have a new starting quarterback. He's the most credentialed quarterback Curt Cignetti's had, in terms of sort of incoming transfers. If you think about just like as good as Fernando Mendoza turned out to be, or Curtis Rourke, or Jordan McLeod, or Todd Centeio, Josh Hoover has a level of power forward experience and proven production those guys didn't have, but he's still new, and he did have, a documented sort of issue at times with turnovers. Now, some of that's going to be on a quarterback, some of that's going to be on maybe his environment. Is he having to force things? Is he struggling for some consistency around him? They're going to be very young, as I said a minute ago, at tight end. And that's a position where they've only really ever had 5th and 6th year seniors, since Cignetti's been here, 4th, 5th, 6th year seniors. And so the fact that your most experienced tight end there is a redshirt freshman who had 2 catches last year, I think, against Bethune-Cookman, that's a pretty big departure. I think the biggest, they don't have a ton of depth at linebacker. And I think the biggest single, and I say this not to demean Fernando Mendoza, but this is just how much how highly I rate D'Angelo Pons. I think, there's no single player that's going to be more difficult to replace the impact of than D'Angelo Pons. He was such an impactful player just across the board for Indiana. He was so talented. He opened up so much else in that scheme for Bryant Haynes. And I think that I think Jamari Sharp is going to have a really good year. I think he was probably better last year than people realized, but he just kind of went under the radar because Pons was so good. But they're still, like I said, they need luck with injuries in a couple spots, just like any team does anymore. They need to get Hoover's, sort of past turnover issues smoothed out, and they're going to have to develop both, maybe at some positions, frankly, just some proven impact performance, and then in some other positions like offensive line and receiver and cornerback, they're going to have to, certainly linebacker, they're going to have to develop some depth as well. So it's not like they're without questions, but we could have had a number of these conversations a season ago too. We could have looked at Fernando Mendoza and said, he showed a lot of promising signs at Cal. Is he ready to take the next step up? We could have looked at running back and said, not exactly sure what they've got here. We could have looked at, at tight end. I don't think anybody expected Riley Nowakowski to be as big a part of the offense and the passing game in particular as he turned out to be last year. You flipped to the defensive side of the ball. We had no idea Indiana was going to be able to play three linebackers with such effectiveness. Tyreek Tucker and Mario Landino were not at the beginning of the year, reputationally the players they were at the end of the year. We can go on and on. Every team's going to have some of these questions. I don't think there's anything that I look at for Indiana and say that gives me sort of undue doubt over this team, unless you could tell me, yeah, they're going to lose both starting linebackers or something like that. But then obviously that's starting to get into, well, how are you supposed to control that territory? I think Indiana's in a similar position to a lot of programs of its stature at this point, in terms of a lot of good pieces. The question is just, can you keep guys healthy and put them in the right place?
Sure. Yeah. And the last thing I want to ask you, Zach, and I do appreciate your time and making this happen. Obviously, we talked about already at length, the amazing run the Hoosiers had last year and how incredible that was to come away and be national champions. But obviously those expectations now, they're higher. Like, everybody's looking at Indiana and saying they're the favorites, right? They're the team to beat. So how does Indiana manage those expectations going into this year, not being a team that's as much under the radar, but a team that, like you talked about, they're one of the highly regarded programs in college football. How do you manage those expectations going into this year and continue your level of success moving forward?
I think it's a fair question. And I think Cignetti, one of his lines at Media Day, I forget who he said this to, was they asked him, about being kind of the hunted rather than the hunter. He said, I bought a bigger gun. He's always going to have a one-liner for situations like that. But I don't think there's any question that one of the sort of peripheral questions around this season is going to be how this team handles, success and expectation and pressure. Now, listen, they didn't come out of nowhere last year, and I think that's one of the, I know that that perception frustrates Cignetti. He will tell anyone who asks that that his 2024 team did not get nearly enough credit for how good it was, number one, and then for what it set up for 2025, number two. I think there's a perception and one of the, maybe one of the sort of myth-making lies that will emerge over time, as things always do around that 2025 team, is that it came out of, just sort of sprang from nothing. That was a carryover from 2024. They were obviously better, but 25 doesn't happen without 24. And so this is a group that has maybe already experienced a little bit of that expectation and that pressure of expectation. And then you also think about the fact of, they were the favorite the whole way down the line in the playoff last year. They spent the back half of last season as one of the top two teams in the country and so forth. It's not like this team hasn't felt some of that, but it is different when it's defending national champion Indiana, it's defending Big Ten champion Indiana, it's, Josh Hoover stepping into the shoes of a Heisman Trophy winner. It's, hey, it's great that you were Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year or Big Ten Kicker of the Year, but can you follow that up with an even better season? Can you get better from that? Or, how do you handle it? Maybe a Elijah Hardy is a good example of a player that, kind of emerged sort of from the sort of the periphery of this team last year, but now he's being picked as, potential defensive player of the year in the conference. How do you handle that kind of expectation on an individual level? It will be different, and it will be one of the one of the things that we ask about this team. When they reach, especially sort of those pivot points in their season. I'm thinking about Nebraska, Ohio State, Michigan, Washington, maybe USC. Are they still comfortable? Because the ultimate strength of every Curt Cignetti coach team I've covered, and obviously it's only two of them, but I've seen a lot of Curt Cignetti football, is more than almost anything else, he has the ability to get his team where every coach in every sport dreams they can, which is worried purely and completely about what's next and focused only on the next practice, the next game, the next challenge, that there's no slip. When has Indiana genuinely looked like it fell prey to a trap game in Curt Cignetti's too? Even that Penn State game to a certain extent, when you look at how much NFL talent was on the field for Penn State, I don't know that that's probably the closest thing you could say, but that was certainly not Indiana playing down to its competition any more than it was Penn State playing up to its competition, and maybe for the first time that season, playing up to the potential that we all thought we saw before the season began. Mm-hmm. There's never been a moment when a Curt Cignetti team has genuinely sort of lagged against a demonstrably worse team, other than maybe like your week one hiccups and things like that are just going to happen sometimes. So does that ability to focus and just shed all the unnecessary ephemera and block out all the noise, does that continue? Is that sustainable? Does that catch up with this team at some point this season? I don't think it's an unfair question to ask. But there's also, in fairness, basically no evidence in front of us right now that it will. And so I think until sort of proven otherwise, we have to give Cignetti and his team the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Zach, really appreciate your time again, coming on, talking about Indiana football a little bit. Where can people find you, find your work, and all you do over there for the Indianapolis Star?
Yeah, it's indystar.com /sports. And then, at Zach Osterman on Twitter, I try to repost everything on Blue Sky too. I'm on there less often, but just for people that have kind of shifted over to there. But yeah, and then we have a YouTube channel, IndyStar TV Hoosiers. It seems like you can find us now more than ever before. So it's just kind of pick a medium and we're probably there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Zach. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. And Hoosier fans, let us know your thoughts on the 2026 season and everything that is to come. But other than that, that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, have a good one.